It's Wednesday, the 12th of August, 2020, and we welcome you to a TILT webinar with Dr. Felix Kronenberg, the new normal rethinking hybrid course design. I'm Helen Myers. I'm the chair of the London branch of the Association for Language Learning. We always at this point thank Heike Philp and Linguascope for supporting us in putting together these webinars, in hosting them. But the most important person here who has brought us all together, who has put together the programme, is Joe Dale. So Joe, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us if you're available to help people?
I would love to, Helen. Thanks ever so much. So we're really delighted to have Dr. Felix Kronenberg this evening for our TILT webinar. And I'm sure he's going to blow everyone's mind with his very learned knowledge and experience around hybrid teaching and the use of technology in language learning in general. So a bit about me. I am an independent languages consultant. I've been working flat out since March, more or less, although I did have a bit of a holiday last week, which was lovely. Supporting language teachers during this this crazy time, with free webinars through TILT and with other paid webinars as well. In the chat, I've just posted a Google Doc which has 18 example sessions around remote teaching ideas or hybrid ideas. If you would like some support through paid webinars through your department or individually or through your association, get in touch. Feel free to pass on that link to whoever you would like to pass it on to if they could use my services as well. And I would love to support anybody who's interested in this very difficult time. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you very much, Joe. As far as ALL is concerned, the Association for Language Learning, if I could really promote this and ask you to join, if you're not already a member. If you are a member, could you in the chat tell us that you're a member and tell other people how good it is to join an association? And if you're from another country and you belong to an association, please do tell us which one that is. It is lovely to be able to meet with people who are that committed, who will professionally join an association. We give a magazine every term, and there's an awful lot of voluntary work that goes on to support each other, such as these webinars, where I think we're up to I think we'll have had about 50 by the end of this week. This might be the 50th actually. We've done a lot. We've really enjoyed it.
Not bad.
If you join tonight, you'd get 10% discount on membership of ALL. Actually, that goes on until the 30th of September. On the ALL London site, that's where we always keep a link there's a page for every single webinar, which will have a link to Joe Dale's Joe Dale 100 YouTube channel, where he keeps these webinars plus others. And then also we keep a picture of the class photo, the chat, and also any other links which any presenters like to give us. Coming soon, then we've got another one which is coming up next Tuesday, and you'd be very welcome to come there. It's already there. You can go along to that link or scan the code in order to be able to join there. We have an etiquette here. We're always professional, we're kind, no one rants. Whatever's happened, we've had quite a big bombshell today in the UK, but we're not going to talk about it today. And also we're very happy to host speakers and participants free of charge, and obviously they're responsible for what they say. So now over to Joe, who's going to introduce our wonderful speaker.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Helen. So I think I first connected with Felix back in about 2007 or 8, I think. I think, if I remember correctly, it was when you were doing was it digital boot camps, I think, if I remember correctly. I think they were called boot camps. Anyway, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But essentially, Felix had invited some people along to his language centre at the time, and they were learning all about new tools back in, like the new exciting tools back in 2008, 2007. And I was very jealous that I couldn't get on a plane and come across and get involved, because it looked absolutely amazing. And then we've connected ever since. So I've been reading his blogs and following him on Twitter, and I've only met face to face once, which is when I came to Harvard in Boston in 2015 on a very hot August, in the month of August. It's probably pretty similar to the heat we've got right now in the UK. And we got to meet face to face, and I got to hang out with Felix for a few days, which was an absolute pleasure. So I've been wanting to ask Felix to do a webinar for us, because I knew he'd be a great person to ask, particularly around this big question of hybrid learning and preparing for September. And so I'm so delighted that you're here, Felix. So over to you. I won't gush anymore, but we're really pleased that you're here, and we're delighted this is being recorded. So it means that other people can benefit from your wisdom. So over to you, Felix, and thanks for agreeing for doing this.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me. Let me get my slides up here. Take just 1 second. I hope that looks good. If I can, does that all look good?
Yep.
Yep. So you see the main slide. Yeah, so I'm really excited to talk to you. Obviously, it's a little difficult not having the audience here, even though I'm doing a lot of webinars. It's always very difficult to know who's in the room, especially I'm speaking from the United States in Michigan at a big university. And so some of the examples that I might give might not apply exactly to your situation, especially if you're in secondary schools in the UK. That might be a little different, but hopefully you can see and listen to some of those things from our experiences here, and maybe be inspired or even critique some of them. So I just wanted to share just a little bit. I direct the Center for Language Teaching Advancement. We have a number of things and that we offer, and even pre-pandemic, we've done a lot around innovation, around hybrid and online language teaching. And here's just a small slide of that. We have a master's program in foreign language teaching. It's fully online. Our graduate students are all over the world. We have a community language school that is both face-to-face, but also online now. We train teachers in online language teaching. That's a paid course. If anyone's interested, I'll put the link up later. We're now developing advanced courses. And we also innovate around less commonly taught languages that we can kind of scale up and teach online. So that's just a little snapshot of what we do in the center, among many other things. But what I wanted to talk around today is about hybrid language courses. Sometimes they're called blended. So that's a term that some people use, sometimes interchangeably. But I really wanted to talk a little bit about this time in history with the pandemic, and the kind of challenges that this has brought. And I heard that you're going to be face-to-face in the fall. We're going to plan for a kind of mixed hybrid or face-to-face, but we were told that this can change anytime with a new wave or local outbreaks, etc. So I want to talk about this more as a general design concept, so that it's not just for the pandemic, but also sharpen this and see how we can do this in the future, how we can learn and take the good things about online language teaching and supplement the face-to-face teaching and look at those different modalities there. I also think we need to decrease barriers around this, and I'm putting up a picture there. This was at my previous college in Tennessee, where you see a language classroom, and that's already a mix of being in the virtual space and being in the physical space. You see a lot of students on different kinds of devices there. I'm in the background. They're actually walking around helping students, but many of them are working independently or in groups. And so moving this kind of modality online would be fairly easy, for example, and pivoting there. And so a lot of this comes down to good pedagogy and course design. And so hopefully we can expand this a little bit, and I'll give you some concrete examples and also some concrete technologies later on. And some of this is really introducing elements of choice for students and going to beyond a one-size-fits-all approach, because the students are very different. And so some design strategies for this. What I mean by design is obviously planning a course very carefully and having the user, the student, in mind throughout this whole part. What we in the US often use is a process called backward design. We start with the learning goals, the learning outcomes. What do we want our students to learn, to be able to do at the end? We often frame this around so-called can-do statements. I'm not sure if those are used in the UK in the same way, but those are for beginners could be, I can read a short text, or I can understand the gist of a news article, I can hold a short conversation about food for 2 minutes. And so we often think about what do we want the students to learn at the end? What are the outcomes there? And then we go back from that and say, how do we get there? And this is a really lengthy process. For an online course, we estimate well over half a year to plan such a course, and often we involve multiple people in that. We also, one of the strategies that we use in the best practice are small units and steps, and especially for online courses and for courses that might shift or change, is to not have massive projects or breaking everything down so that the students can easily follow. One thing that became very clear as we helped faculty move to online teaching or remote teaching rather in the spring was that less is often more. We often try to cram a lot of things into our classes, and sometimes it's better to just say it's okay that we don't do everything. We can't do everything, especially if we're in a crisis right now. And then the other thing will be a simple and dependable structure. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Another concept that we often refer to now is called universal design. And you may know this. This comes also from the field of accessibility. Students with different needs, they can be physical, they can be cognitive, but students with different needs that we design for them, not as accommodations in retrospect, but that we design something to make the content, the course, the learning accessible to all. And if you look at this physical building there, you see some stairs on the right side and a ramp on the left side. The ramp would be something we would call universal design, rather than retroactively thinking, oh, someone might not be able to walk up there. Let's put in a lift, or let's put in some way that someone in a wheelchair maybe could get up to the next floor. If we put in a ramp, anyone can go up there. Anyone can go up there. You don't need the stairs to go up there. Anyone can move the ramp up and down. And in fact, many people that we might not have in mind to begin with could go up there. Someone with a baby stroller, for example, or someone who's carrying heavy load. Could be anybody at certain times that needs this access. This metaphor also works really well for learning design. If we can think, for example, that some students can access everything perfectly well, but if they get sick for a week, they will lose access to the course content. It'll be really hard to catch up with that. I think especially in this coming semester with a pandemic around us, we will see this, that there might be some shocks, not just to the whole system, that the whole school might close down, although that certainly can happen, but it could be that 1 or 2 students are sick, or that they need to quarantine. They're not sick at all, or they're asymptomatic, but they will not be in the classroom. So if we design it in a way that they can still participate, that would fall under universal design. Another aspect to universal design is that after we've designed something, we can keep up with it, and it should be fairly future-proof, right? So the ramp is much more future-proof here than the stairs are, because they enable a lot more possibilities in the future. In course design, this is the same way. If we design something for an online or a hybrid course, for example, that should be able to then be moved to a face-to-face course if we designed it carefully. All right. I wanted to give you some concrete examples, of course, how that might look like. And so I'm showing you kind of my mock-up of my course and how this looks. We use a system called D2L. And obviously you will use a different system, maybe as Moodle, or you have Google Classroom or Canva or Canvas, one of those different systems. I think it's very important, first of all, to use something that is already available and that your colleagues are using. I've seen it where each professor or teacher uses a different system. That's not good design, because then the students for each class will need a different system and learn it. It also needs to be extremely simple. So if you go to the site not knowing anything about my course, what you will see is that there's very few points of interaction when you first encounter the course. And this is for a fully online course, but it's the same site that I use for a hybrid course as well. There's a course home, which is the page we're on right now. You can click on content, that's it. So there's really just 2 choices. You can look at what's on this page, or you can click on content, and I'll show you what happens there. It basically gives you an overview, and without any kind of explanation, you can access this information. What's really crucial about this for hybrid classes, for online classes, and I would even argue for face-to-face classes, because this is exactly how it would look like for a face-to-face class as a supplementary way, is you can find everything there. It's your hub. And whatever you choose as your hub, it could be a Google document, it could be some other way of sharing it, a wiki. That's not really that important, but it is important to have this one place where everything is captured, right? So that the students or the parents, if they have a question, there's one place they can go and they will find the answer there. So that's really your central way of making this possible. Now, the great thing is this should be able to move to face-to-face, to online, and to hybrid environments. So I'll go and show you how this looks. These are the learning goals. I just talked about them. They're here in English because so that other people can understand them too. But this is for a third year German course on the history and future of German media. You will see what students are supposed to learn at the end. And I talked about backwards design. That is really the most important part. At the beginning, the students will see, I should be able to do this. Every single test, every single assignment will go back to these I can do statements and support them in some ways. If I want to do something and it's not in these can do statements, either I need a new can do statement or I will not do it in that class because it doesn't support those learning goals, right? And they can be more vague or they can be less vague. Then important links, communication, all of those things, you know, that's just very clear. It's very simple how to get in touch and how to understand the course. You don't need to spend a lot of time understanding what this is. I'll go to the next slide. And again, this could look very different for you, but you will see that what you saw on the first page is mimicked here. And this is kind of dependability for the students, that they will easily see, where am I? So they will see, oh, there's module 1, there are always dates there. So they will always know where they are. If a student misses a class, if a student isn't there physically, for example, even for a few weeks, they can still continue down the path and be successful in the course. That is an important design piece, of course. A lot of our classes, at least here in the US, revolve around physical participation. Even if the student sits there and their mind is elsewhere and they're not participating, it's still considered important to be there. And a lot of the design that we now do is we look more at the outcomes and see, how do the students need to get there? And there might be different pathways, as there are many different kinds of students. How can we design it for them that they can follow down this road? And I'll show you in a little bit a very radical rethinking of that. That's probably be too radical for you to implement in the next weeks or months or even years. But just to kind of show you what it would look like if the students actually have a choice about getting there, getting to those goals that they want to get. All right. So from an example from this course, I teach this course every semester on German media, and you see here's an activity we did in December. It's a VR video game. It's actually a game, kind of a comic bomb diffusal game, where one student has instructions and the other student in this VR environment needs to diffuse the bomb, right? So this is not a violent game, just to put that there. It's also, of course, in college. The students absolutely love this, and you know, they need to have language in order to play the game, because the student with the VR headset cannot do anything. In an online class, I cannot do this. Look how close they are. If I have 20 of those students there, each with those headsets, they cannot play this. This is really bad. So I designed my class, several class sessions around this game. So I need to pivot and I change. A different game that I wanted to show you, and again, I'm teaching a media course here, is a game that we can very easily change. So this is a game called the 20 Questions game. If you don't know it, that's the one link you got to write down, 20q.net. It's available in many languages. I've used it for well over a decade now. You can play it in multiple ways, including online. So I could play this via Zoom. The students can play this face-to-face without a computer. We can play it with me as the game show host, basically in front of a screen in class, and the students play it with me or against the computer. They can play it in pairs in the class. There are multiple ways of doing that. What I really like about this example of the 20 Questions game is it works without the technology just fine. You know, the game, as you might know, is you think of something and then the other person asks questions. In this case, it's the computer who asks the questions, and you need to answer them with yes or no, maybe, sometimes, etc. It's a really powerful game because it's all around language and thinking around the right kind of answer. After 20 questions, the player who had it in mind needs to then reveal what the item was. And it's particularly fun to have the computer guess this. So if you've never tried this game, and this website, there's also an app, try it. It's great, it's free, it's wonderful. You can also play it without the computer, but this can be played via Zoom as well. You can have the students play this against each other and record themselves and upload the video somewhere. Multiple ways. And this is a kind of design that can be different. And I could even envision something that it's up to the students to decide, do they play it with someone next to them, or do they play it with someone who's somewhere else in the world via Zoom, for example, right? So that is one activity that we can then change. So for me, I would rather do that now than the VR game. The VR game is definitely flashier, as I showed you. This looks really cool and the students loved it, but this has, for language learning, is just as great. And there are some, I was just introduced to this. I'm gonna try this out. It's a way to play tabletop games virtually. It's a free service called Tabletopia. There are some paid for games, but there are plenty free games you can play via voice chat. And that's a really powerful thing. There are also games that you can play cooperatively. So they're like, ironically, one of the best cooperative tabletop games is called Pandemic, and you beat the pandemic. That would be an interesting game to play right now together. And you can play it digitally, you can play it physically. And so some of the modality, of course, changes here, but we can implement this in different kinds of ways. Another part I wanted to talk about is assessment and testing. And this is the #1 thing that comes up when we talk about language, online language courses. People immediately come to, how do I test this? How do I give a grade? And obviously we have to do these things, right? Our school boards, our presidents, our provosts of our institutions, directors and principals, and the laws often require this of us. And so grading is one of the most difficult things. And in terms of assessment, and often we talk about plagiarism, how do we prevent plagiarism? This comes up quite a bit. In the online realm, what we often talk about is that the design of the test needs to be in some way that it's, for one reason, really difficult to cheat. And we know that there is not more cheating in online courses than in face-to-face courses if the assessment is designed well. One of the types of assessments are that we lower the stakes and have less high stakes testing and have more frequent ongoing kinds of forms of assessment. So that the students aren't even put into a position where they freak out and then panic and then cheat. If this is throughout the semester and the cheating itself becomes more cumbersome than the actual, just doing it, then we see relatively little cheating. So for example, we see this around writing tasks. It's a very difficult thing. So one thing is having students submit lots of writing on a variety of topics and continuously following up. And if we see this perfect thing that might just come out of Google Translate, would be that we then already after the first class talk to the student and say, okay, what's happening here? You're on my radar. We'll need to talk about this. If you bring in another perfect essay like this, I'm going to ask you some things about this essay, and that's fine, And so usually the students own up to this, and there are ways around it. There are also ways of putting, if we do really backwards design, if it is around the learning goal, the assessment might look different. So we go away from vocab quizzes and more about showing mastery of the concepts, often in a way of pass-fail than in that. Now, this is a difficult topic, and I know there are many different situations in the UK that might not work. At a university, this is different too than in secondary or primary education. But I'm just telling you how we're rethinking this, and some school districts are doing this here as well. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the digital toolkit that all of us should have nowadays. In online teaching, you have to have a digital toolkit. In face-to-face and hybrid classes, you should have one anyways. This is my digital toolkit. This might look very different from you. It depends on what your school district provides, what your school provides, what they allow you to do, right? And so those tools are chosen based on not just personal preference, but also what other colleagues are using, what other colleagues at the institution are using, what the university is paying for, and what they're supporting. So when I'm not going rogue on some things, even though there's always a better tool for something, oftentimes it's very good to use something that the students have already used and that they're familiar with. And I want to add, especially as we're talking about hybrid here, I would put in as a criterion is choose a tool or choose tools that work both face-to-face and online, because then changing and pivoting isn't difficult. It allows you to fine-tune the kind of spectrum of hybridity that you want, because hybridity is essentially the whole part between the two polar extremes. On the one, we have face-to-face without any kind of technology. And on the other extreme, we have purely online teaching without any physical contact. And then everything in between is hybrid to some degree. And you can change more to one or some of the other. There are different names. I said blended, some is technology-enabled teaching. But in the end, you're working on the spectrum. And over time, the level of hybridity will change, right? So you can increase it or you can decrease it. And I could see us doing that, especially in this coming year until the pandemic is over, that we might choose to go further towards the online or less to the online. So the tools that provide both, access to both, are really easy tools to use right now. And those are the tools that really came up in these last few months. They also shouldn't be complicated. For the students, you don't want to troubleshoot everything. They should also be easy for you to use, and they should be enjoyable to use. If there's a tool that I love to use as an instructor, if there's a tool the students love, people are going to use it much more than if it's something that's clunky and cumbersome and ugly. So that is a consideration as well, that kind of simplicity and even joy of using that. So I would also warn against taking on too many new tools. So if you're new to this, if you haven't used technology a lot, don't try to use all of them. As a general rule of thumb, we often recommend one tool per course, new tool per course, so that you can get used to that as well, and decrease the level of stress. Just want to quickly go around there. If there's questions at the end, I'm happy to answer them. VoiceThread, I've used for many years. It's wonderful for storytelling, for discussions around media. Flipgrid is a wonderful tool that we use for actually oral assessment, but also for oral asynchronous communications. They've updated it recently. It's got mobile apps. It's free. It's secure. It's an absolutely wonderful tool. There's a lot of support there. Zoom, I don't have to say anything at this point. A course management system is good to use. D2L is what we are using here. A calendar scheduling system, Calendly might be one. Microsoft Bookings is something that I currently use and switch to. Are tools where students can sign up for online office hours. And that's a really good time saver for me as a teacher, but also a good way for students to get extra access in the digital realm. Padlet is an absolutely fantastic kind of virtual cork board and also a simple blogging tool. Microsoft Teams is something we use. Nearpod is a wonderful way to share interactive slides and PowerPoint slides with students, both in the same room. You don't even need a projector for that. So you can show PowerPoints outside on students' devices, and it very nicely moves also into the digital realm, both synchronously and asynchronously. And if you don't know about Nearpod, please go to that site and check that out. And then Quizlet is absolutely fantastic too for vocabulary. I'm sure many of you know this already. Some of the games there are fantastic. Quizlet Live, one of the wonderful games that you can play physically. That doesn't work quite as well right now, but you could possibly come up with a class there in Zoom breakout rooms. So I promised at the beginning to show you what it might look like to radically rethink a course that might be a hybrid in nature. And I'm showing you this. This was at my previous college at Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee, where we actually took the whole program and moved some part of that to a fully hybrid design. Excuse me. And we made it quite playful too. And I will show you and I present to you. This is the city of Pfefferhausen. The students created a whole virtual city. In fact, if you go to the city of Pfefferhausen, it doesn't exist really. There's a whole website, it's still there. I don't maintain it anymore. But the students created this, including the name. So the name Pfefferhausen is totally made up. We made sure that city doesn't exist so we don't face a lawsuit. We came up with this fake city, and the students were fake participants in the city. And we did this both in the physical space where we had many activities where the students incorporated them, but we also did this in the digital realm. And many of you might know this, in French pedagogy, there's a concept called Les Meubles, where it's essentially a global simulation where you simulate any kind of situation and play it through with the students in a kind of long-term role-playing game. And so the city for us was a framework here of having the students explore what they are interested in and use a variety of media. And I'll show you some of the digital spaces, but we did have physical spaces too. So we had a Shark Tank activity where each had a business and they had to pitch it to the other people in the classroom. Just to give you one example about the physical classes. They each created a business and they created websites. So here you will see different websites. Das Pfefferhaus, Peter Piper's Pfefferhaus and Pfeffermarkt, for example, all student creations, all completely fake. The students had a ton of fun creating the city and incorporating the people. Many of them took on extra tasks. So we got quite geeky about it. And so a library was built, an airport, botanic gardens, and all of these were then pages written by the students. Each student also incorporated an alter ego. And the students then were in the digital and the physical realm that person. So what they did was they blogged about it, they tweeted about it. I'll show you a few more things. They recorded an answering machine message. We even got into the physical realm and printed some post-it notes for the city of Pfefferhausen, as you see here. And we got some merchandise here. So that already gives you some idea of what a hybrid project might look like and a way of being in both the physical and the digital realm. And by the way, this is a very normal space we're all in. All of us have multiple devices now. We're routinely chatting online, sending text messages on Zoom, but we love being face-to-face as we see how much we miss it during this pandemic now. So this is something that's very normal for at least for our students, right? And so here you will see, this is how we planned this. This was a kind of a mission-based thing. So the students were kind of, had these kind of to-do list of what they were doing in the physical and the digital realm there. We expanded this project then to basically have the students be born into the city and kind of develop their persona. And we pegged this to the courses that they took. So in the 101, they were learning about colors in school and simple concepts. They grew up, went to university, later started a business, and things became more complex at the time. Now, and this is where things are changing now, there's really no choice, and not every student will like this. And some of them, many of them liked it, but some will say, this is silly, this is not my kind of thing. So the next step of this then was, well, let's make this a choice for students and give them other choices. So we use a system called gamification. You may have heard that. That's not actually using video games. Gamification is actually using gaming principles in non-gaming concepts. And so here's what we created. We based this on many things that you see in the real world now that are based on the psychology of gamification. Video games are extremely powerful in that people often can't stop playing them. And gamification kind of uses that and that psychology. For example, your Apple Watch does it, right? So you can fill those rings and you can even compete with people you know and share your data with. You can also use this if you go running, for example, you can get different things. So your watch measures this and you go up a level and it measures your best time for a 5K or for a half marathon. Here's another example. This is the utility bills, and you can compare it to your neighbors here. So these are smart meters, and so you can share am I using more than the average of my neighborhood here? For example, that's the kind of competitive element of gamification. There's a visual element too. The airlines are using this a lot, where you can level up and become a gold member, a platinum member, and you level up, and there are actually real world implications, because if you have a higher level, you can get upgraded to first class, or get access to the lounge, or collect more miles. But people spend a lot of time thinking about this and paying extra to kind of level up, okay? There are many apps that do this now. There's a wonderful app, it's quite old at this point, called Chore Wars, where you can have your your kids do chores in real life, and they choose and they get experience points like they would in a game. There are to-do apps for adults to get stuff done. There are other apps that use this gamification in the education realm already. You may have seen some of them. The top right is called Gradecraft. This was developed by the University of Michigan, our neighboring school here. And they built a course management system around gamification principles. On the left side, you see a gamification system that uses kind of a World of Warcraft theme, and students kind of sign up. And then Class Dojo is a management system where you can in real time give students plus or minus points for behavior. And this is more aimed at younger students. Now, what we did with us, and I'm showing you this concretely, what we then did for our German classes was we put tons of tasks on them and said, you can collect these points. The points will translate to a real grade, 20% of your grade, but it's up to you, and the system will tell you how to get to the points, and you can measure, and it's up to you to get it. And so they had multiple things they could do, and some of them were quite simple tasks. So the first one you see up there is write a story about Pfefferhausen using a digital tool, and you get 200 points. That's great, but that's a lot of work. And the details for this would be, you need to see your professor and have him or her correct the essay, and then you publish it. There are other things that are really easy to do. For example, one thing at the bottom is email list. So they have to sign up for the department newsletter. They get 5 points. That's very few points, but we never forced any student to sign up for the email list. And lo and behold, all of them signed up for it. Whereas when before we made them do it, they didn't sign up for it. So we kind of flipped it around and brought the agency to the student and said, you're an adult, you make the choices, and you will get the grade, and you will always know where your grade is. And so what happened, I'll show you a couple more of these. We had, I don't even know how, in the end, well over 60 of these different missions, right? That the students could choose. We even had a mission of make your own mission. It's called Suggest Your Own Quest, that you can do or that your other students can do. And so we flipped it around. The students, we no longer organized film evenings, we just made it a quest. And lo and behold, we had multiple students organize film evenings. If you attended certain events, we could, if I'm going to use a bad word, manipulate the students, but it was manipulate, or we can influence the students and actually show them what is important. It is one of the biggest, most important aspects of this was that we as faculty were talking about, what do we want our students to actually do? What about this language table that we require them to come twice a semester and they all show up during the last 2 weeks of class? Why do we make them do that? How much is that worth compared to watching a movie or writing an essay? So we put in a lot of quests there over time. I'll show you. This is the kind of, we developed this kind of gaming plan. And so the Pfefferhausen was just one part. So the students who loved participating in it continue to participate in it. Other things they did. And it was very interesting to see some were virtual things and some were physical things. And I think this fits well with hybrid. Here are a couple of examples of what the students did. Top right, students organized an evening playing Siedler von Catan, the Settlers of Catan, in German. To the top left, they made a flyer about a Jeopardy German evening at the Language Center. At the bottom left, a caroling practice session. And you can see the virtual fire logs there in the background. And they practice German Christmas songs. Not in the world would I have come up with that task for my students, nor would I felt comfortable for them to do it because, you know, of religious reasons here in the US, and I would have maybe not done that. But here, if they choose to do it, They chose to do it. It was their thing. We monitored it. And they also did many other different activities. The number 2 things that they chose to do was switching your phone to German, and a podcast called Top Thema mit Vokabeln, which is a wonderful German podcast with some exercises. We also introduced some very traditional tasks like writing a long extra essay and going through it with your professor at least once. About 20% of students actually wrote extra essays because they wanted the extra practice. We just never forced them to do it. A lot of this was in the digital realm, a lot of this also in the physical realm. It kind of blended all of these together. And I mentioned already before that we as faculty talked quite a bit about this. And here's what it looked like. We created a Google Doc, and we often then said, how much is this worth? Why are you doing it this way with your students? And so we broadened it from just one language class to multiple language classes. And then the students had the choice. And think about it in a hybrid format there. The students then who maybe aren't coming in because they're quarantining or they're not feeling well or the parents won't let them, or for whatever reason, they can do more digital things. This is again a kind of universal design, whereas other students who say, I want to get together with the students, I'm immune, or I have a mask, or I don't care, or I'm vaccinated, or whatever it might be. The students can have that choice, the parents can have a say in it. So it's not the one size fits all. It was an incredibly freeing thing. This again is a project that you couldn't just implement this quickly. This takes quite some planning, but it kind of turns everything around, right? Rather than looking at the teacher-centered approach of saying you have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's here's a lot of things, but we're still maintaining some things. We still would turn student work down and say this is not adequate. We also put in a number of things where we said, okay, we can put in a logic thing and say, you can't just watch movies. There's got to be something communicative in there. There's got to be something in there that, matches certain criteria. But the students never came and asked us. They always knew what to do. They just used the system. And if you were thinking that, wow, they all did this, how did you grade it? Well, the way we graded this was we just gave them the points or we didn't. And we actually could give it back, as you see here in this app. We could just give it back. We could give extra points. We could give feedback through this. But the students also sometimes didn't do it. And some things were disappearing. And so not every student got 100% there. But they all knew how to get it. And there were no questions asked why some of them got a bad grade at the end. So this was a really interesting project. I'm happy to talk more about it at some point, or if you have questions. But what this leads me to is actually an app that you can implement right now. What we used here was called something called Resli, this system. It's a bit clunky, doesn't work on mobile well, so there's a lot of drawbacks here, but an app that you actually can use and should maybe try out, and that is free, and that's kind of the practical part, is called Goose Chase. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's kind of a scavenger hunt that can exist in the virtual world, and it can exist in the physical, and also especially in a hybrid space here. It's incredibly easy to use. I'll walk you through it right now. I'll explain everything about it and give you some examples of how to do it. And again, you can design this as your teacher, or what I would always recommend even better, your students can create scavenger hunts either for each other or for other classes. Goose Chase also pivoted because they know that the physical right now is not working well in most parts of the world. And so they changed one of their solutions now is virtual and remote engagement. And if you look at their website at Goose Chase, under solutions, you'll probably want to go to K-12 schools and teachers or university and college campuses. But it works for other parts as well. Just to give you, before I even get in there is a free plan. It's somewhat limited. The plus plan would probably do most things for you. It's $49 per year per educator. That gives you a lot of functionality. The premium, probably most people will not need this. The biggest difference, I would say, between basic and plus is that the plus the students can play individually. The basic you can only play in a team-based mode, and I'll explain that in a minute. There are two components to this. There's a website interface where you build the game, and that's what we're looking at now. And then there's an app for it, which is free. It's both on iOS and in Android. And I can show you the link right now if you want to do it right now. I know some of you will be watching this on YouTube, and the game will not be active at that point and probably won't make much sense, but I can just show you how it looks here. I can show that later to you, but I'm seeing the same tasks as I have in the game on the phone here, and can interact on the phone and do the different tasks here, or different missions. Very easy. So that basically you can create new games. This is the first screen after you click on new game. And I just wanted to walk you through just a little bit of the different options here. So there, you can upload an image, so to kind of brand your game here. I put on our Spartan helmet from Michigan State University. You name it, you give it a description. You can give it a game location. That's if people want to find it physically. So it actually works with a GPS signal. And that's a fantastic thing if for study abroad programs or for campus orientation, where you actually physically need to go to a building and get points for walking somewhere physically. So that's a really cool part. Right now, that might not be very feasible to do that. The next up is then the missions. And on the left side, you will see that I'm just going down the different options on the left here. Very simple to use. There's a mission list. There are also missions, once you build them, that you can reuse them for a next session. And I will show you the basic types here of different missions. These are basically 3 different types. There's a photo or video mission. There's a text-based mission for text-based answers, and a GPS mission. I'm not talking much about GPS right now because of the pandemic, and because that's really something that you got to try out and think through a little more. The first 2 are very easy to implement, and you can create a game right after this event for yourself and play it on your own phone, or give it to your kids and have them play it, or someone else you know, to test it out. And I would highly encourage you to test it out before having students do it. So this is the interface you get if you click on I want to do a photo or video mission, and you will choose on the top left which one you want. You name it, you give it a point value. And again, everything's working around points here. You can attach extra information like a link to a video, to a multimedia source, to a website, whatever you want to a document. You can link it to a Google document, to a PDF. You can also attach an image here. You can add some automation where you can add something like, if this happens, then this happens, right? So that's a little more advanced feature. You can try that out. That adds more of a game. And I know some people who've built kind of games around this where certain things happen after you do certain things, and you can become extremely creative there. If you want to get some examples of really cool game-based design like this, there's a center at the University of Oregon. I can put that on the on the links list, and I'm happy to share these slides, by the way. And you can find them. It's the Castles is the center at the University of Oregon, where they've built really cool games where students are kind of in a difficult situation, and they need to use this game in the target language to kind of solve missions, etc. Very, very neat stuff. But this is very self-explanatory. The next mission is a text input, and there are different ways to do it. You can give answers that provide answers that the students need to type in, and if they type the right answer there, then they get the points. Or you can just say whatever they type, they get the points irregardless. And you can also take the points back. I'll show you that. Okay. And this is the GPS mission. And again, you can just set the location on a kind of Google Maps kind of thing, and actually say if the student gets there, they get the points, right? So that's essentially what the GPS mission is here. I'm just going to show you what this might look like, and I'll be happy to share this then how it looks on the phone as well. But one game might be start here, take a selfie or team photo. And so the students might get together in the physical realm, take a picture. But it could also be something around, you know, take a picture of your favorite spot in town. And so the students, while they're not physically in the classroom, could go there, take a picture and upload it. And you will have access, which is absolutely fantastic. You can also take a video. And this is of course wonderful because for language and later as a teacher, you can download all these. And then if you want to grade them, you can also grade the videos. It's quite fantastic how you can do it. And maybe we can have the discussion at the end around what to do with the tool is always only as good as the design, right? There's a way to brand it. I think this is mostly for companies that might want to do it, but you know, if you have a school logo, that might be a place to put this there. There are different ways to deal with participants. So you can create them as teams or individual players. Now, again, this is where it comes in. The individual players is a paid service, and then the teams is for free. One caveat is if one team member does one of the missions, they disappear for everybody else in the team. So if you primarily want to use this for grading, you might not want to use this, right? But you could. That's up to you. You can pre-create the teams and say student 1, student 2 are on this team, student 2, 3, and 4 are on this team. That makes it easier. On the other hand, you know, it's as always with grouping students. Do you want to give them the choice, or do you want to set that before? And again, there's pros and cons to all of this. You can even send invites beforehand. It's very easy, by the way, for the students. If they've used it once, it's very automatic how they set this up. So no technical issues that I've had so far. You can stretch this out and make the game for 1 hour, or you can make it for 6 months, right? So you can do this all semester long, an ongoing game, or you can make it just for one class session. And I would recommend starting with one class session, telling the students about it and saying this is experimental. Now, if you do this asynchronously, if you do this, you know, the students are doing this at home, they're not in the classroom, you might want to give them more time, especially during this pandemic, give them more time because they might not have the time to do the activity right at that minute or hour. And so giving them some choice. And you can always see when students do what. All right, there's an activity feed. As people live do these things, your videos, your answers, everything will show up there. As a teacher, as a professor, you will always see what's happening in real time, which is really quite fantastic. There's a leaderboard. You always see where the students are, where the teams are standing. There's a competitive element. As you can see, you can manually adjust the scores. If a team is, I don't know, switching the language and all of a sudden is speaking in the L1, you can take points off there. Up to you, right? You can remove teams here if something isn't working. This is as the game is going. You can also see the different submissions here. And notice at the top right, it says download submissions. This is absolutely fantastic. If after the class, you click on download submissions and you get all the videos and all the stuff that the students presented, right? And so technically, in a hybrid scenario, you can also do this in a flex way, in that some students might do it face-to-face live right there. And the students who can't be there can do it after hours and do it later, right? So in the kind of high flex model, that's a kind of term that a lot of people here are using it, where you use online synchronous, online asynchronous, and face-to-face, and the students continuously switch between those modalities. It's a good tool for this too. And then there's a dashboard, and just to kind of show you, you can see completion rates, you can see submissions, and you can see active teams. So you can also see the timeline there. So it does give you some data, which often obviously is quite important. Now, if we were face-to-face at a conference right now, I would ask everyone to get out their phones and start working as a team. I've the setup as a team, it wouldn't be right the same. I can share the code with you right now if you're interested, and you can go there. Let me go see if I can find the code. But I'd say we'll talk about it, and I'll put it in the chat just in a minute, and then you can play it on your own time here. Before we move on to the discussion, I wanted to give you a couple of resources to read more, both maybe on this and on other issues as well. And again, I'll share the slides with Joe, and then you can have the links. You don't have to rapidly write them down. The first one is the FLT Mag, the Foreign Language Technology Magazine. You'll find most of the technologies that I talked about, including Goose Chase, and a small article on the Pfefferhausen project. You will find articles there. It's a really good way also to have archived webinars from that organization. I'm the immediate past president, the International Association for Language Learning Technology. It's free, it's peer reviewed, it's short, it's practical. It's got tons of stuff. It's written by practitioners, by faculty, by teachers. I invite you to submit there if you have a technology tool. It's a great way to publish. It's a very nice way to publish. It's not an academic journal in that it's very highly competitive and very difficult research-based to get in. So consider this, but it's a fantastic resource to subscribe to. The second one are the IELTS webinars. IELTS does those for free when they're live. The recordings are member benefits. If you want to join IELTS, that would of course be wonderful. Then you have access to the whole back catalog of the webinars, but the live webinars are free. There's just one, I think this Friday on Google Translate in online classes. I talked about this earlier. My colleague from the University of Memphis is talking about this. So wonderful webinar. That's a great resource. The last resource I mentioned, this is our online language teaching course. This is designed for teachers and faculty who want to become proficient in teaching online. And right now, this is an introductory course. It's a paid course. And then we're working on advanced courses right now as well. So if that's something that maybe a school district would pay for, etc., we do have some international non-American participants that would be a great resource as well. But that's where we are. Again, we'll put up the links again. I can also put them in the chat right now if you prefer. And I think I'll end with these pictures of our very empty campus right now. We're a big university of 50,000 students, and that's how it looks right now. Pretty empty, but we're working all very digitally at the moment. So that's the formal part of the presentation. And now we'll do some question and answers. So thank you.
That was fantastic, Felix. Thank you so much. Really, really, really interesting approach. That was great. Yeah, we've got a few questions, if that's okay. Let me bring up my Google Doc. Right, so you mentioned the with the virtual city of is it Pfefferhausen? Is that right?
Pfefferhausen, yes.
Yeah.
Pepper
So
City.
what is the French equivalent that you mentioned? Can you remind us?
Oh, yeah, so in the 70s there was a system called Le Meuble, which is I think like
furniture.
Building, right?
Or building,
furniture,
yeah.
Right?
Or l'immeuble,
building.
right? Okay.
Yeah,
right.
And so what I heard, I talked to teachers who've used it, this half a century ago, who used this concept where the students are essentially inhabitants of this building. That's from what I understand. I couldn't find any English articles. They're all in French. My French isn't that great. So the students are inhabitants of this, and they go to the concierge, and the concierge sends them on different missions. And I've seen this multiple ways too. The other thing is called a global simulation, and that's very often common. So students might be, being in the role of La Résistance during World War II, and they look at different texts and videos and scenarios and act out as such. And I know one person, one teacher had a course where the students were a film crew filming a film on Martinique. And so they had to learn about Martinique, and they had to set up the film, and they had to book the hotel, and things like that. So there are many of these kind of, they can be historical, they're essentially role-playing games, right? Where you have, they kind of come a little bit maybe like fantasy role-playing game, where you have the dungeon master, and then the students talk and ask, and you interact, and this can be very physical, it's theatrical, right? Performative, right? And so this takes it a little bit in a different, more into the digital realm, I would say. It's not just on paper or in the imagination, it also can be simulated. So when we did the city map with the different businesses, it almost looks real. We showed it to our colleagues in Spanish and French at the college, and they were saying, you know, wow, this looks real. Like if I don't know the language, those websites, like this looks like a real city to me. And, you know, the virtual space in some ways is real nowadays. So we created this website that if you happen to go to the city and didn't know it, I mean, we put a disclaimer there, right? And say, this is fake, this is not real. You know, but it looks real, and it's kind of for the students, you know, it does exist, you know, our world exists in the virtual space. It's not fake. It in some ways creates its own reality, and that's what we I think that's what we really like. And it became funny as like Pfefferhausen became this thing in our language department with other languages too, where colleagues from other languages asked what's happening in Pfefferhausen, and we kind of started joking and being like, well, we're building an international airport right now. And so people kind of started talking around this concept, and it became quite playful also for us faculty. And I think one of the great things beyond all the language learning, it just kind of made it more human, right? It kind of, we could project ourselves into it both as the teachers and the students are just so creative in this, and they could also be somebody else. So I think the digital realm is particularly fantastic for changing your identity. In the physical realm, that's you, that's your body, that's your language, that's your voice, and your all of these things that come with it, right? The digital allows you to be that other, right? To be that other. And we actually had students who changed their gender, right? So we had one, you know, 19-year-old male student who was this, who was an Italian-born grandma who lives in Germany. You know, he came up with this and he incorporated her. He had a Twitter account. He tweeted as her. You know, he said, I'm from Italy, I'm doing this. And he played with that, right? And some students were just like basically creating a similar alter ego. But I think this was a way for students to be heard, to play this. They do this all the time. They go to TikTok, they go to these social, you know, tools, and they're not themselves there. They're kind of selling themselves. They're selling a different version of themselves. This was a different way of doing this, but in a controlled way. It also allowed us to get around a lot of privacy and copyright issues in terms of, you know, the students, we made sure they use Creative Commons license, not copyrighted images. But other than that, they could hide their real name, which is really important, so that if they leave a digital footprint, they were just Herr Müller, and, you know, who knows who that is, and they can delete that account. It didn't tie into their personal accounts, like if we use their Facebook, for example. And so we were quite mindful of that. I'm sure in the UK, that's a big deal too, especially, you know, for minors, is protecting that. And so that really allowed that to us. So look at those global simulations. There's some good articles about this too. And again, there's so many different ways of incorporating that. You can, if you have study abroad programs, you can incorporate those, and that makes it hybrid. You know, if you have tandem projects, I mean, there are multiple ways to kind of mash this all together with different tools too.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, some of the language community in the UK have been making like virtual adventures and escape rooms off the back, I think, of some of the webinars that we've had.
Right,
but for those people who'd like to replicate the idea of a virtual town, what practical advice would you give them, just to check out the website and see what you've done? Or are there sort of articles you could refer to, or some sort of, you know, framework that could help them?
Yeah. So the basic thing was that the main concept was we just created a WordPress site, but you can use any website builder. We often use Weebly for things. So we told the students, you can use the tools. I think important is to make sure that the students are aware of things like copyright, legal things that they shouldn't put on there, you know, whatever is illegal, what might get you in trouble and or them. The other thing, and then the students use that to build their portfolios. And I realized that in primary and secondary school, this is harder than in higher ed to pull off, for sure. So we used that for the students. They then had these kind of portfolio sites that we linked to the city website, and everything we put on the city website often went through some kind of review process. So they submitted as and then we had like a course assistant just copy paste it basically onto the site, so that it also looked good, right? And so, but there are other ways too, that this is a really good project building where the students can do this today. And I would even advise, especially the teachers who are maybe not as tech savvy as others, to just rely on the students, because they can really contribute. And some students who were not doing very well thrived in being able to assist the faculty member in producing this, right? So we saw some students who rarely speak up in class become really imaginative. And in fact, some of these Twitter accounts kept going on, right? So some students had these Twitter accounts and they just kept tweeting as these people. And, you know, this is kind of a thing nowadays, you know, with memes, and people do this anyways, have fake Twitter accounts. So this was very natural for the students. We did ask them to follow some like real world personalities, so the Chancellor of Germany or whoever they wanted to follow, to also have some, to mix kind of reality and the fictitious world in there. But it can be quite basic there. You can just start with that and you know, think around again, what should the students get out of it? Like, we wanted them particularly to have real world skills, like building a website, being able to communicate via social media in the target language, you know, understanding short messages by politicians or whatever. Like, think about the backwards design. Why should they even do it? Because you don't just want to do it because it's cool and because, you know, someone else did it, etc. But you want to do it, what are the actual outcomes? Because they're not going to learn a lot about the genitive here, right? If they do that, they might, but they learn it in context, maybe, right? Because a lot of students said, if this is on this page, I want it to be correct, right? So they really paid attention to accuracy, maybe more than, because they had an audience, right? They knew the page hits that they would get, right? So, and I think nowadays, 5 years later, we could even make this into a competition where we would say, okay, do this Twitter account, and while staying legal, you need to get 500 followers, right? Do it. I mean, you could have really a lot of fun with this and have the students like follow other people and put out actual news or real things, right? It doesn't have to be fictitious. It can also be blended. So it really depends on the context there. And I'd say just kind of brainstorm and think about it. You know, and how do the students, is this just an add-on? Do you grade? How do you recognize the work that goes into it? We replaced a lot of our essays, you know, whether they write about the Library of Pfefferhausen or if they go and write about the Library of Berlin. In the end, it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, they can also do their research in the real world and then translate it into the fictitious world. And that's essentially what then happened, is that we looked at real world examples of what are the elements of a business website at a German bar, for example. What do they have? Okay, they have drinks, they have this. This is the face-to-face stuff. We send them to some websites. They all talk about it either face-to-face or virtually. And then they come back and say, well, you need to have prices on them. You need to have some kind of legal disclaimer and the address and all these things, right? And they'd be like, okay, those are your elements. And just naturally, you're talking about all of these things. So instead of having a discrete section about, you know, how you say prices in German, you can just build it straight into this lesson. And it's very concrete and very natural in that sense, right?
So did you give them sort of free rein on what they could do in relation to populating content onto the site? Or did you give them some examples, like you could make a Twitter account, you could create a description of a local amenity, or how did you structure it?
Yeah, well, we definitely gave them expectations and a kind of a framework and said, at a minimum, you need this. You can do more. We also gave them how we assessed it and said, okay, you know, don't spend too much time on the design that it looks great. Spend more time on the language. And so we really created a rubric and said, this is important. The overall, the overall appearance was maybe then 5% only, but then we said, accuracy is this much, and originality is this much, and just kind of following instructions this much, and you just kind of create your, just like around any multimedia product or any kind of essay, you would create kind of your criteria, and you can find tons of rubrics, and as we did this with colleagues, especially having these conversations around, be like, well, what is really important to us? Is accuracy more than quantity of output, right? Is that more important that they write more words and it's okay if they're making mistakes? Or does it have to be absolutely perfect? And does it have to be super complex, or is it okay to do simple sentences? And those are things that those are obviously deeper discussions that, each teacher needs to think about. And that's obviously a much deeper discussion about teaching philosophy and methodologies and all of these things. But in terms of the tool, the students should know what they get assessed for. The students should know what's expected of them. And that's just, again, comes back to design, is what are they supposed to learn, and tell them, I want you to be able to do this at the end, and you're practicing this. And that's why we're also assessing this, right? And so that makes sense then to the students, where should they put their energy and what's really important. So that's absolutely crucial. If you just say, just come up with something, that's going to fall apart. So you do need some structure, and you need a lot of design before. And some things you might need to change. Like sometimes, you know, students, it's hard to foresee some of this. So I wouldn't base my whole class around it. We essentially took these dreaded culture portfolio, as it was called, the culture portfolio, where it was like, watch 2 movies, go to 2 language events, go to do 1 this, read 1 extra essay, these things. We just took that away and said, it's not just a list with check marks, it's a little more comprehensive, and you have the choice there. And that really worked out extremely well. It is more work on the front end, and later on it saved us time, and actually teaching became much more fun. It became less repetitive for us. There were lots of surprises for the teacher, which after a few years of teaching, of course, it's we like that if we get surprised by our students and don't always see like, oh, I've seen this 20 times, right? So.
No, I think it's wonderful. I think in my own head, I'm thinking how you could then make that work in a secondary context. And I think that you would have to give more scaffolding and more structure, and maybe take elements of what you've talked about,
right,
and build it up over time. But I think it's fascinating. Helen, what are your thoughts?
Well, you could probably see by my expression, I'm just loving this. I have totally, I mean, obviously I'm always going to like everything and, you know, everybody who comes along, but this has just, I think the expression blown my mind in that, but partly because, yes, it's appealing so much to what I'd love to do. And I've tried to do in the past, to be honest, unsuccessfully, because I did try 3D virtual environment, Second Life, that sort of thing. And I've been disappointed that I put a lot of effort into it. And what you've shown us there, I think, are things which actually they're tools in an area that the students are familiar with already. I think it's great. And yes, following on what you've said, Joe, about, I can definitely see everything you've talked about, how it could be put into a secondary context, sometimes having to be, you know, you shared the GDPR, Joe, about some of the certain things. And I noticed that for the Goose Chase, it said you can't be under 13 or something. There'll be certain things that you'd look at to see what you can do. But everything that you said at the beginning of the talk was so helpful as well, because not only we've had that really excitement at the end of this thing, which is really, wow, yes, we'd love to do that. But all of the advice you gave, all absolutely doable, and that very important advice that you find out what your school will allow, if they support things, if they pay for things, that's really important. But thank you. I wanted to mention my colleagues who worked on this too, Professor Bridges and Professor Vanske at Rhodes College as well. They implemented this in their classes too. I started with Professor Bridges. We team taught half a course together, basically, where we decided on this. And then I left the college. And so that's kind of where, you know, that project building that, you can't just take it with you. And we really built this as a team. And I think that team building was really, really important piece. And I think that's what really worked in this kind of handoff. If you go from 101 to 102, those are our course numbers, and then 201 in the third semester, etc. That kind of handoff became really cool. And seeing my colleagues interpreted this kind of concept a little differently. So we each had our own little flavor of what people were doing. And my colleague, Professor Vanske, was, she did more with like video work and had the students create videos, and I did a little bit less of that. And I think that's okay. This was more of a framework, really, right, that we created. And I think had I stayed at the institution, we would have taken this on, and I don't know if they still do. But technically this could be across schools as well. This doesn't mean this needs to be in one class or one department. This could be something with partners. So that's really something to consider there as well. I was thinking, because you're right, I understand the business about there being a lot of, you called it front end planning. And that's so often the case, isn't it? A really good, really, really good, powerful lesson.
Yeah.
Tons of preparation, but you reap the benefits.
Yeah.
But of course, if you then share it with others, and I think this is what's happening in the community at the moment and in schools, where we are sharing even more than we ever used to of the planning for it, recognizing it takes a lot to prepare a really good lesson. Someone will say, well, I'll do that one, and someone else will do that one, and then you can tweak it a little bit to go with your class. But what you were describing there, I thought it did make me start thinking, we've got this fantastic community that, you know, Joe's set up with the MFL Twitter RTI, we've got ALL, as an association, we've got all these links and you've got keen people, and to be able to think, well, actually, yes, we could design these things which could then be, you know, saved out to somebody else. And it really did. And whether or not we could get things as well, because at the moment, one of my responsibilities is sorting out trips abroad. Well, we can't do that next year. So I am looking for things. How could we perhaps, you know, interact with people in other countries? And I have tried that before with, as I say, with the 3G Second Life, and I just didn't manage to get anywhere with this. Really, I can really see this, and getting teams where you have a French and a German and an English person all together in the team, say.
Right, yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, it takes, you know, things like project-based learning and student-centered learning, and a lot of these kind of labels that are flowing around that we all use nowadays. But I think especially in terms of the student-centered, you know, often we say it's student-centered, but in the end we still design the lesson and instead of the framework. And if we really do want to go into student, this is giving up some control, right? And so this is dangerous for teachers, and we're not used to that. You're giving up some control, and you need to think about more things, creating the framework. But in the end, then it really is student driven. And you know, this is really just a beginning. I mean, I would love to, if I had more time, you know, this could be something that if you plan this throughout like 10 years, and with all the new tools that have come along in the last few years, you can do a lot of things. One thing that, you know, I come from the technology world. So if I see a new tool and Joe writes about a new tool, I'm like, oh, I gotta try this, right? I shouldn't, because I don't have the time, but I love it. You know, what we do is we take the tool and we try to cram it into the class and be like, this is the new app that everyone uses, and we just try to retro engineer. And what I really liked about this project was we can naturally use these. So instead of having some sort of awkward Twitter thing that the students have to sign up and they're like, okay, I got to follow and how to, no, this was a way to just kind of bake it into the project and use these tools in a very natural way. And kind of the tools also were shifting, and it was never around just one tool. I think it wasn't the main thing there, both with gamification and I like to call it agency-based learning really more, because it's around student agency and choice, it's more around the concept and not the technology. The technology then supports the concept and enables it. I mean, but you know, these gamification things, you can do those on pen and paper. You can just count beans, or, you know, we're doing this where we put like stars on students' papers and be like, well done, right? First grade, you know, students, you put in 3 stars or write a smiley, and then you collect the stars. I mean, in the end, it's very human is to collect these things, and, you know, you're just kind of collecting points or stars or whatever it might be. So I think that's what we really like. So if you don't want to use technology, if you're just face-to-face, you can have a corner and you just give stickers to your first graders and put them there if they do something well, or they get a sticker with the task written on it. I mean, it doesn't have to be technology. It just made it very easy for me to then get a lot of data out of it and just kind of see where the progress is and allow it to happen in the virtual world too, beyond the physical. So
yeah, it's brilliant. In relation to Goose Chase, can we just sort of clarify what you can do for free? So you can have, is it one mission, is that right? And then, because Helen was also asking about, can you have 40 devices simultaneously with the free version? Is that right, Helen?
Yeah, when I looked at the price thing, because I definitely want to do that. And you said that most people can you don't have to go for the Pro, but for the one which was the one before.
Oh, the Plus. So yeah, the Plus version, you can have 40.
It said 40 devices. Yeah. I was wondering what that meant. Whether it was, I mean, I can look into it another time. It was just occurred to me. I thought,
you know, I've never had such big class sizes, so I haven't actually encountered this myself. It also keeps changing. So, you know, as with all of these tools, you go back half a year later and they're like changing their pricing model and they're adding different things. And, you know, as with any tool, the caveat is always that, you know, you might plan a class around and then they're like, okay, that no longer is working with a free plan. Like we've all seen this over the years, right?
Yeah.
This has been around for quite some time. I think for the most part, I really like, and this was pre-pandemic, I liked the team-based work, and I never used this for kind of grading. This really was a fun class where I would do things like, it's a sunny day, the students, you know, I teach at a college, they go outside and I ask them to do stuff. Like they need to interview people, they need to sit somewhere and talk to each other. I even sent them on GPS missions on the first day maybe. I used it as a team building tool so that they get to used to each other. So I have some kind of fun activities and be like, take, you know, photos with 3 different people or with someone who's from a different state or something like that, just to kind of get to know, mingle, do that kind of stuff. it worked really well for those kinds of things. I haven't done any large scale projects just because you need the class that supports it, and then you kind of need to build some kind of assessment into it, and I just haven't taught it. I will do this once I'm back in. I'm now teaching a third year media course, so this is the best tool for this. So I will be using this more once we're back in the classroom. I'm just going to teach online, and so I'm not 100. I still have 3 weeks to decide on that. So but on the plus, I think you can try almost everything out with the basic plan for now. That's what I like about technology, that gives you that not just 2 weeks to do it, but you can do a whole semester with your students, do one class with this, and do the team-based approach, and just test it out maybe with your easiest going class, and talk about the experience afterwards. Do it for 20 minutes and then talk about how they felt, if they liked it in the target language. It's a really good activity just by itself, right? Did you find the app useful? Was it difficult to navigate? All of those kinds of things.
So at the moment you're using it with face-to-face students, but were you saying that you could run it completely virtually? So you could be everyone could be at home and you could be running an activity in Goose Chase.
Right. So that's the thing, is that you can shift it and just do it fully. I mean, it can be asynchronous too. Like the game, as I said, you can do a 1 hour game and it's all happening at the same time. You can have this over months, going this game, and then people do it. Some do it in September and then not, and then they do it in November again. That can be a very different thing. And you could mix this too. These like alternate reality games, you could mix too and introduce real life content as it goes along. So there's so many possibilities with this. I would almost want to teach a graduate teacher seminar and just kind of come up with a amazing semester. That would be really good, and kind of looking more deeply into that tool. And I know most of us, usually we don't have the luxury. There's things we have to do that our administration, that our lesson plans tell us to do. And so, but the lightweight, do one class, a partial class, try it out, do it out of class, and just tell them, take a photo here, do a video recording yourself in your favorite spot in town. So even if you're in remote teaching, you can use all of that. And it's a way for students to submit information.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Ever so much. It was really good. I think we will have to come to a close now because we've taken up so much of your time. And one thing I know that we sometimes manage to take a selfie of everybody. And normally I interrupt and I say, oh, let's take a picture, let's thank. But in a way, your presentation just flowed into the questions that I didn't really want to interrupt. So I hope you don't mind that we didn't have a formal clap. But you'll see in the chat, people were just so bowled over by it. They really were. It was great. So thank you ever so much. And thank you so much, Joe, for introducing us to all of your friends as well, who've become our friends, I hope.
Oh, so it's been amazing, Felix. Thank you so much.
Yeah, maybe we'll do a follow-up just on this. Then,
yeah, it'd be lovely.
It'd be lovely.
Part 2.
So much new stuff. Yeah.
Have you played around with Action Bound at all, Felix, which is similar, isn't it, to Goose Chase?
Not. I'll write it down.
Yeah, it's actually a German company, and there's a German version and an English version, and it's similar. So you can like take a photo, record audio, and that sort of thing. It's Action Bound. I put it in the chat as well, but yes, it's Action Bound. Anyway, if you just search for Action Bound, you'll find it.
Fantastic.
Okay, right. Okay, well, thank you ever so much, everybody.
Great. Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing you again. And I'll stop the recording now. But we've packed so much information. Thank you ever so much.
Awesome. Great to see you.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you
so much.